Welcome back to the Bit by Bit podcast. In today's episode, I speak to Connor Brown. We recorded this remotely and we had some serious technical issues, but we got through it in the end. And I'm glad we persevered because I really enjoyed this one. I hope you do too.
Everything this afternoon, so whenever is good for you.
Cool. All right. Perfect. Well, yeah, like I say, thanks for coming on. And just before you came on, I was just having a quick read through Bitcoin, the blockchain for truly smart contracts. And you put it perfectly. You know, I have that sort of conversation so often with people who are very blockchainy and thinking it's going to solve these sort of problems. And to be honest with you, I found it quite difficult to articulate and explain to them why, because they get so excited. And it's a difficult one to explain, really. But I think you've put it really nicely there.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you having me on. And so that article kind of came out of my frustration coming from a legal perspective. And, when I originally got into this space, it was because I really wanted to, see what all the hype was about smart contracts. And I'm a law student right now, so I'm learning about contracts. I'm learning about how they work and what their important functions are. And when I looked at smart contracts and what they're being sold as, I didn't see a contract. I saw something completely different.
Yeah.
And the really, really key takeaway is that a contract does not require a third party to be there when you're actually engaging in it. It's simply that you can fall back on a third party for enforcement if that's necessary. And so with that in mind, kind of started to look at, well, the Lightning Network looks a lot like this sort of third-party enforcement mechanism where you don't need them, but you can use them. And that was kind of the inspiration for the piece, and I think still is why the Lightning Network is far succeeding its competitors, just because it's taking in those basic elements of contracts and sort of putting them into use.
There was a line in there which really stood out to me, which was, with Lightning, millions of transactions can take place without needing a judge at all. However, in the event that something goes wrong, the benevolent Bitcoin judge can step in. And I think that really encapsulates it, is that you don't need all of this on-chain. It only needs to step in when there's a problem. And I think that's what it all boils down to, really, isn't it?
Exactly. And the approach of other chains is, kind of like this complete surveillance at all times approach, which, sounds nice in theory, but, it goes back to the scalability problem, that you can't practically have one chain supervising every single transaction that takes place at all times. The only way you can get a scalable result is if you kind of, are able to parse them out. You allow people to interact on their own. And that also is important for privacy reasons, too. You don't want the surveillance overlord watching every single transaction. You want to just kind of be able to do your own thing. And then if something goes wrong, then you can go back and fall back on chain.
Yeah, exactly. I guess coming from that legal viewpoint probably drew you to that more than most, I'd imagine. I mean, how did it... I've listened to a podcast with you on before and, a little bit about it, but what made you... Well, first, what made you stumble across this, and what is it that really grabbed your attention? Because it's been a short amount of time you've been in this space, and it seems like you have just gone absolutely full steam ahead. And it seems like you haven't come up for air, and it's taken over your mind, which is something that I've experienced myself, coming at it from a different viewpoint, but the same thing. A couple of years ago, I came in and all day, every day, this is all I think about. And it's weird, isn't it?
It's very weird. It's probably one of the weirdest things that's happened to me in my life, just because it is the sort of mind virus that you just can't get rid of. I think initially I started just because I was, a law student trying to figure out how to make a good resume. And I was thinking, well, I'm at Stanford. It'd be great if I had some sort of expertise in some technology field. And Bitcoin seemed like, or at that point, it wasn't even Bitcoin. It was blockchain technology that I was very, very excited about. And, that was more just trying to develop an expertise that I could market myself with. And I think that what really pulled me into it was kind of seeing this perfect storm in terms of the unique philosophical insights that Bitcoin's predicated on, and how that lined up with what I had previously learned. I had been partial to the ideas of, the sort of skepticism, the like Nassim Taleb's work on by randomness and black swans, and skeptical of these sort of forecasting experts that can analyze a data set and tell you like a crystal ball what's going to happen in the future. I'd always had that natural skepticism, but I think Bitcoin was the first time I had a way to express, all right, here is an alternative to that system, because it's very easy to criticize, it's very difficult to construct, and seeing that real world instantiation of here's the alternative way, instead of relying on a board of 20 experts in suits sitting around a table to determine interest rates for the entire economy, we should instead take that decision out of the hands of humans and simply say the money supply will be static, and we can build banking and credit on top of that. But to keep the money supply static seemed extremely important for kind of embracing that humility that comes with understanding you can't predict how these complex systems should be operated, and kind of taking that step back. So that was I think from there I was the possibility seemed endless, because I realized that this philosophical insight was extremely valuable, especially after 2008, and it kind of keeps going from there.
I don't know if you found the same, but like you said, when you say, oh, well, this seems like a crazy idea to have a few people making the rules for everyone on the planet, and they have all that power, it's only once you learn what you know about Bitcoin that you go, well, there is a viable option that's an alternative, because until then it's like, well, yeah, whinge all you like, but come up with a better plan, and once you know what you know, it's kind of like, like trying to get it across to people that actually, unless we're all crazy, but it seems that this is a real viable option, and that it solves so many problems. It seems simple in retrospect. Once you know, you go, why like this seems so obvious, but it takes a long time to fall down that rabbit hole and sort of all the things to link together, doesn't it? That's the issue with it, I think.
Especially, I think a lot of people, as just, it's just the nature of their lives. They don't have the time to, rigorously do an examination of every single, novel idea that someone comes up with, because most of the time they're just pitches on scams, or they're just, they're just blowing hot air, they're snake oil salesmen. And, it takes kind of a leap of courage in a couple different ways to kind of go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, because you have to first be willing to say, all right, all the people in suits you see on TV, yeah, they're not really experts. They think they are, but they're really not.
Yeah.
And in fact, they're more dangerous than just doing nothing, because, it's one thing to say, you know what, we don't know, we can't predict it, so we're just going to be cautious. It's another thing to say, all right, I'm an expert, I can predict the future, and you're not doing anything risky as long as you follow this, simple investment guide or something like that. So, the people that are
IYIs, as Nassim says.
Yes, exactly. And so the people that are supposedly de-risking the system are actually, dramatically increasing the risk in the system. And swallowing that pill is really, really hard. It goes against essentially everything that you're conditioned, which is, these people are the experts, these people are the smart academics, they have their tenured positions, they've done research, they have their Nobel awards, and, it's hard to say, all right, all of that is wrong. But from a first principles approach, when you take like a Hayekian view of knowledge and you say this is a fundamental human limit on the ability to know complex systems, then, all of it seems to kind of fall away. And then you look empirically, these people have never forecast a recession, never forecast a banking crisis in their lives, and continue to get it wrong. It all kind of piles up.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know if you found it scary or exciting. I sort of found it somewhere in between, because it is sort of exciting to see what can happen, and it's scary to think, wow, how clueless are we in the system, and how bad are things at the moment. And the more you dig, the more dirt you find. It kind of, it's like an endless, it is endless once you start digging, isn't it?
It really is. It can be, I mean, it is kind of scary in a way. You feel like you're going a little bit crazy in the beginning just because, like, so many things that were constants in your life are suddenly called into question, and you don't really know what to believe or who to believe. And I think a lot of people can kind of go too far in that rabbit hole too, because, you know, if you go to one extreme and you're like, all right, I believe everyone that everything like the mainstream says, then, you know, you're a sucker. But if you go the complete opposite and you're like, all right, everything the mainstream says is wrong, there's no, like, all the mainstream views are completely backwards, then you can go into some really crazy stuff too, and you don't want to go too far. So you have to, like, I don't know. It's a very delicate balance that I try to. I've almost felt like, you know, I've spent a ton of time on Bitcoin and economics and money, and in that field, I feel reasonably certain about the Austrian school. But in terms of like other fields like medicine or nutrition, it's just like so overwhelming with information and you know, a whole other branch of expertise that I just kind of stick to Bitcoin. My brain.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's brain can take just Bitcoin because it's just endless. And once you start layering on everything else, it's just, it becomes too much, doesn't it? I mean, when you, so you were at Stanford, and were you still there when you started learning about all of this stuff, or had you finished already?
Yeah, I'm still at Stanford right now, actually. I'm in my last year finishing up. And I started down this, gosh, like a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years now. So it's been, law school's a 3-year process. So I'm on my last year. I'm actually working at the Cato Institute right now in DC, which is like a libertarian think tank. And you know, they've
cool. Okay.
Yeah, they've been great at hosting me and basically letting me be a visiting scholar for cryptocurrencies. So I've been focusing on, you know, Bitcoin and doing some publications, and you know, I had that smart contract one, and then I'll also have a few more coming down the line on essentially how Bitcoin can bring out like private legal systems, because law actually originated, or especially contract law and commercial business law, originated when you know, merchants, they wanted to deal with each other. They usually dealt with each other on trust, you know, like, I'll pay you next week if you deliver it now. They needed some sort of formal enforcement mechanism because, you know, European cities became more interconnected and they started dealing with people they didn't really know. They couldn't necessarily trust them, and so they needed some sort of enforcement mechanism. So they created this thing called the law merchant. And the law merchant, this is around like 1000 AD. The law merchant basically created inter-merchant juries, or not juries, but trials, where if someone breached a contract, they would go to another merchant, and the merchant would act as like a judge. And so you would have a legal system without any sort of government or nation. And it worked very, very well, and was sort of the basis of a lot of ideas that we have in contract law today. So my idea with this new piece is thinking about how Bitcoin can enable this sort of on a global scale, and a shift back towards private legal systems, because, you know, right now there's a bunch of defunct legal institutions. There's a bunch of, you know, developing countries that don't have strong property rights guarantees. And so essentially with Bitcoin's, you know, multi-signature schemes, you can have very safe, very safe contracts with people that are arbitrated by, you know, sort of like a third party to the transaction without ever having to touch an actual, you know, nation state legal system. So you can reduce contract cost and generally increase your ability to transact with other people, completely avoid the banking system, and avoid counterparty risk as much. So that's kind of where I'm you know, going now, is thinking about how we can kind of return to this privatized notion of commercial law.
I assume you see Lightning being a big part of that then.
Yeah, I think Lightning is especially important for, you know, cross-border payments, and, you know, sort of just further integrating this sort of global economy. But I do think online, I think on-chain transactions are still going to be big for like high dollar transactions, and the multi-signature ability for on-chain type stuff is huge. They're already starting to use it in darknet markets, and they're basically, each transaction when you buy something on a darknet market is a 2 of 3 multi-sig, and Bisq is also, I don't know if you're familiar with Bisq. It's like a peer-to-peer.
I love Bisq. We've got a bit of a problem with Bisq here, though. The liquidity is dreadful.
Really? I've never used it, but I think that it's something that like it's definitely early on, but I feel like they're onto something very, very important in terms of the model. So, who knows? And there's also the point of Bisq is like, you never need it until you need it type thing. And like, it's good just to have it, and maybe we'll never need it because there won't be any sort of crazy crackdown that will, necessitate using it. But I think that in terms of a peer-to-peer protocol, it's very, very cool. And they sort of have the same idea. They have reputation systems, 2 of 2 multi-sig, I think, right now. But you can also still dispute it and have someone from the community sort of adjudicate the dispute. So it has a lot of these notions that we saw 1,000 years ago coming right back to life. So I think all of that is extremely exciting. And thinking about that on a global scale is kind of overwhelming, but very cool.
Yeah, it is. And, with Bisq, I actually think that the UX is really good on it. A lot of people have complained and said, oh, well, they're not going to compete with a Coinbase or whatever. And it's like, well, for all the reasons we've just said, it's better, but also it's really simple to use. I mean, I found that, I don't know if you found the same, like being in Bitcoin, I've been in for a couple of years. When I first got in, all this stuff was really, really scary, and like sending a transaction was scary, and using any of this stuff was quite clunky. And now I'm thinking, well, it's so early and it's already pretty easy. So I can only see these things getting better. And they've got, I think, is it Wiz working on it, and a few others. So it's, I think it's really exciting. Really exciting.
No, I mean, to say that UX is lacking, like I've used it. I've used it a little bit. I've basically tested it. I haven't used it substantially or anything. But it seems very amazing, honestly. And the fact that it's all peer-to-peer and it's like a thing you can't shut down, I mean, it's really something. I think you're totally right. Like, people are just judging it way too early. 10 years from now, it's going to be wild.
It's even this last year. I feel like if you blink, this space just moves so fast. It is mind-blowing. And I think it's with Lightning stuff, it seems like it's going to accelerate much faster, because all the protocol stuff, obviously, you have to be very, very careful with. Whereas with Lightning, it's like you can really experiment with this stuff. And I see that it's going to just explode in the next 5 years.
Yeah, and that was actually something I just published another piece today, actually, that was responding to criticism from my last piece. Essentially, on my last one, when I was talking about smart contracts, some of the people from the Ethereum community said, it's not good that you have a really conservative base layer. You can't do all these, fancy things for smart contracts. And my response was basically like, you want the base layer to be as conservative as possible. And that really strong foundation allows people to have confidence in building things on the second and third layer. And so I think you're exactly right. Like, we're sort of out of the woods a little bit in terms of like, we have this really stable, set in stone foundation. And now we can really get creative with iterating on top of that, because we know that it's not going to change very much.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, just what's happened, like you said, the last year in Lightning has been wild. And then atomic multipath payments, or I think they're called multi-part payments now. That is going to be huge. Like, I mean, they've already started integrating it in C Lightning and LND, and then once they get the send function, in I guess the next release is going to be really wild, because that's going to dramatically reduce routing failures. So it's crazy to imagine what's going to happen. You have what the development with Square's Lightning Development Kit is going to be really awesome too. So I went to the Lightning conference this year, and that was incredible, seeing all those people. And that was just for Lightning. like an entire conference just for a layer 2 thing on Bitcoin.
I know.
Wild.
It is. It's mad. I feel like I miss out on a lot of these conferences and bits and pieces because there's not a huge amount that goes on in the UK. There's one in next month actually in London, Advancing Bitcoin. But I see all the bits that go on in the US. And I'm like, I miss out on it. It always looks so fun.
Yeah, the Lightning conference. It was in Germany. That was actually my first time in Europe. But
it was the one in Germany.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I don't know if it'll be in Germany next year, but you should definitely check it out if it is.
I think I've lost you, Connor. Are you there? Hello. Yeah, I can hear you now. that was strange. It just suddenly cut off. I was yeah. So what did you say? The last one was in Germany, and the next one you thought was?
Yeah, the next one is I think it's still in Germany. I'm not sure if they're gonna keep it there or it's gonna go somewhere else.
Was that Berlin then?
Yeah, this one was in Berlin.
Okay.
And it was awesome. It was a great venue.
I have to make it out there.
All the teams were there for the different protocol stuff. So yeah, it was a blast. I'm also going to be at Bitcoin 2020 in San Francisco.
Awesome. Yeah, I really want to get out to the States. Actually, I've been so stuck here, but if I get a chance, I'd love to come to some of these. It seems there's a lot going on, but I guess then just the size of the States. You've got what I find weird is that there's loads going on in New York, but then you've got the bit license and all this sort of stuff, and you've got a community of people there, and then you've sort of got the antithesis of Bitcoin with that bit license, which seems odd.
Yeah, that was definitely not ideal, and I think it definitely limited a lot of companies being built there, but it seems like there's still a strong developer sort of pool in New York. So yeah, New York's great. I went to a couple of the different chain code seminars over the summer and met them, and it's a really good group of people there. So, and they also have the Socratics with the BitDevs meetup. So a bunch of super talented people. That was another thing that just like really reaffirmed my belief in Bitcoin is like just going to these meetups and meeting people that are working on it and just being blown away by how smart these people are. And I don't know, that was another major turning point. It's just like meeting these people in person and just never meeting people like that before. Yeah,
I found a similar thing. It's I've never experienced anything like it. I go to these meetups, and a lot of it goes over my head. Most of it goes over my head when I go to these BitDevs meetups and like the Socratics and things like that. But it like you say, it reaffirms you because you sometimes think, am I crazy? Because it's such a small group of people, especially on Bitcoin Twitter. Like it's such a small group of people, and we all have such strongly held beliefs, and then you speak to most people in the outside world and smart people, and they sort of the idea of the things that we're talking about seem absolutely wild and crazy to them. But once you meet some of these people within Bitcoin, you're like, maybe I'm wrong, but are all these other people wrong? Are we? They really are just the smartest people I've ever met in my life, by far, have been in the Bitcoin community. It's just mind blowing. And the other thing is just like when you meet the people that are, trying to, critique Bitcoin or detract from it, their arguments are always just so simplistic and like, like it's too volatile or something like that. That like without, and I think that was another thing that really reaffirmed my position is just like getting a strong economic understanding about money and like Austrian theories of how a money progresses over time, and sort of understanding it as it goes through these sort of phases where of
course, it doesn't matter if you can't spend it right now because you don't need to spend in order to like bootstrap a store of value. Like the medium of exchange isn't the first stage; it's like one of the later stages. That in the beginning, it's just about its scarcity and its different monetary characteristics about how well it can store value.
But if you can't buy a cup of coffee with it today, surely Bitcoin's failed, isn't it?
Dude, it's like, yeah, I can't buy coffee with gold, so I guess the $8 trillion market cap of gold is just a fluke, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I will be really glad when Square just like integrates Lightning payments, and I can just tell them all to shut up on that.
Yeah.
Very basic, stupid argument. But,
yeah. So the people who sort of attacked you for your last article, I assume mainly Ethereum community. I mean, did they have anything that you looked at as an argument? And coming from a background of debate, and we can get a little bit into that because I'm interested to know sort of. I've never been involved in debate or anything like that, but it sounds like a really interesting thing to be involved in. Was there anything that you thought, okay, no, that's fair enough, and like I understand your point, or was it all what we've heard a million times and just makes no sense?
I think it's an interesting question. I think that there's definitely, there's kind of two different parts. There's one in saying that there's all these great features in Bitcoin that could be added, and we have proposals for how to improve Bitcoin in this way, and we could do it just like this. And for some reason, the Bitcoin community is just so slow and so conservative. And, if they were just able to change things around faster, then we could have a much smoother development process, and these smart contracts could be even better. I think that's like one flavor of critique. And, I get what they're saying. I'm excited about Bitcoin too. Trust me. But there has to be some sort of patience there because of how critical these things are. And I think that a lot of it comes from a typical software background of like, just make it.
Yeah.
And if it breaks, that's fine. You just make it again and make it again until you get something really great. But with Bitcoin, like people's life savings are on the line, and it's a lot of people. And I think the other big thing that's often missed in this debate is like, even if Bitcoin, in the scenario that there is some sort of terrible problem with Bitcoin that is like an unforeseen error, or like you rush something and it breaks consensus or something like that, if it is a really fatal error, then like this idea of digital money is basically dead. Like on Bitcoin, on Ethereum, on any altcoin, because if the original breaks, then why will the second one not break? Like I think that it kind of lives and dies by Bitcoin in that sense, because no one would have enough confidence to put their faith in something for a second time. And, maybe it takes like 20 or 30 years to bring back efforts if something was to go wrong. So that, I tried to get a sense in my response of just like, here's what the stakes we're playing for are. Here's why, like, rushing it and trying to add new features and bells and whistles at the expense of security, it's just not the way to win the race. You need to be slow and cautious and really make sure what the trade-offs are as deeply as possible before doing something. So that was kind of my response to that first point. And I get the point. It's just, it's a question of trade-off.
But it is what, like you say, it's one, or as far as I can see it, it's not even if we make a mistake on Bitcoin and we lose confidence 20 years from now, something might happen. In my mind, it's we have one shot and this is it. If we don't have Bitcoin, I don't know how we have another proof of work system that's going to be fairly distributed. We had the element of surprise because no one was paying attention for a few years. We have these network effects, and I feel we're up against time, because as we go more and more into this kind of privacy's bad and fiat money taking over and cash being eradicated and all the problems we've got, I do feel strongly that Bitcoin is our one shot, and to, like you say, to lose that and the security for buying a cup of coffee a bit quicker that you could do with your credit card anyway. It just seems crazy.
Yeah, I think those are two very good points, and now I think about it, I wish I had articulated them more and fleshed those out more, because you brought up two really good points. The organic nature of Bitcoin's, like birth or whatever you want to call it, the way that it just kind of came into the world is basically impossible now. Like if you can see these new startups like Grin and these other sort of similar to Bitcoin. I think Grin was probably the closest to Bitcoin's ethos in a long time. And even Grin, despite having its sort of mysterious origins, no founder, it still had, this a crazy amount of press at the beginning. A lot of it was VC backed and, sort of centrally mined. And so, I don't know, I just think that like Bitcoin's natural selection process in the very beginning and sort of slowly growing is actually a very important aspect of decentralization, because there's there's so many people who have got into Bitcoin and then like subsequently got out and sort of lost faith in it, and sort of like we've built this really strong community of people, and without that group, without that sort of like natural process, I don't think we have something nearly as decentralized in the future. And the other part, I think you're right too, is like Bitcoin did massively benefit from being swept under the radar, or for flying under the radar. And I think especially given the fact that, everything feels very fragile. I think especially from our perspective, everything feels very fragile in a monetary sense. And if things go south and these professional risk forecasters are wrong once again about the banking system, then, I think that it could be a really serious loss of human freedoms and liberties. And that if we don't have that escape route, then, we might not see that opportunity again. So,
yeah,
it's, Bitcoin, it's really crazy when it came about. Like I sometimes wonder if Satoshi like sat on it for a while or knew when was a good time to put it out there, because it just feels so serendipitous that to release Bitcoin like 10 years before things start to go sideways.
Yeah, it does. It's kind of, it was the perfect time. And, that first block and the quote put in there, and it all just, it's so clear the point that he, she, they were making. It's like, you can't trust the system as it is, then we need better if we're going to succeed as a civilization. And he's just said it in one sentence, one quote, and it does feel like it was, like you say, perfectly timed.
Yeah, because if it had been another 10 years, if it had been like 2020 when Bitcoin was released, and we go for, like we're starting to see the beginnings of like negative interest rates and things like that.
Yeah.
And we start are going towards this push towards cashless society. If Bitcoin started today and in 2030 we were at where we are today with Bitcoin, then I think governments would already be done in terms of like having almost complete control. So I don't know. It is really wild. It's really wild.
Do you have some sort of, I know it's an agreed point that it doesn't matter who Satoshi is and all the rest of it, but do you have a sort of wild theory on it? Do you have sort of, or something that you'd like to be true, or you just don't care?
I think, well, first of all, I think that it is really miraculous that someone didn't like. I think Satoshi's choice to like be anonymous and just disappear was like one of the best things that could have possibly happened for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But I think my gut is that it's how.
Oh, we're on the same page.
Dude, it just seems so perfect. Especially like reading back through the forums, and you're like, Satoshi proposed this, and then suddenly this other guy is like, I don't know, it seems like a great idea.
Yeah. If you take M1, M2, and 3, it might be worth having some. Yeah, that's exactly who I think as well. Yeah, but it's also quite fun to sort of think, well, could it be an AI, or is it an alien, or these sort of crazy ideas? But
time traveler that comes back and like sees the apocalypse of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think Hal is probably the best bet.
Yeah,
it just seems to fit.
Yeah, it does. Well, if it was Hal, thank you very much, mate. That's quite a gift you've given us all. Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, you're coming from, obviously, you're coming from a completely different viewpoint. You're coming from the legal side and looking at it like that. It must have been quite a serious, steep curve of learning for you, of just the speed at which you've gone through all the finance side of things and digging into that.
Yeah.
Did it bend your mind? I mean, was it just, it must have been a full on, you must have just not blinked basically until now.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I mean, I already have sort of like, I don't know if it's an addictive personality, but like when I really get into something, it's just like I can't stop thinking about it. And so I basically like, well, it was also magnified by Bitcoin because I've always like had these little spurts where I really get interested in something, and maybe it's like playing an instrument or playing a video game or like just really getting into the details of something.
Yeah.
But I feel like Bitcoin was dramatic in the sense of like this is much larger than just developing an expertise and like getting really good at chess where you can beat other people with it. It was the first thing that I felt like there was macro implications for something this big. But I think that something that really helped me actually was my background in not having a finance or economics background, because you sort of are able to question. I think when you come from an outsider's perspective, you're able to kind of question the current dogma of an institution and say like, all right, here are the current assumptions, and you can kind of look at it through fresh eyes that wouldn't have been possible if I had had 4 years of Keynesian economics drilled into me at a university.
Have I lost you again? Are you there? This fucking thing. It's so weird. It just suddenly it went a bit blippy just before it, and then it cut out. But
yeah, I'm not really sure. I've actually never used this internet for anything serious before, so maybe it's just not good internet here.
Oh, well, no worries. We're back on now. I can't actually remember where we were now.
I think we were talking debate or background.
Oh, that was it. Yeah, just as in, how was it coming from that side and learning all of the monetary stuff and how that may have helped in a way. I think you were saying because you hadn't come from that Keynesian economics background, and I suppose then you're not boxed into a certain thought or way of thinking, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of just like, it lets you take like a first principles approach and just kind of stack up where the arguments are. And after reading some of the Austrian school, it just seems abundantly clear where, the real logical arguments lie. So that was kind of where I started. And then, when you look back at a bunch of like empirical stuff of how these people have consistently used Keynesian statistical models and consistently just been wrong.
Yeah.
It's not very hard to go to the Austrian side of things.
It's crazy though, right? That nobody goes and learns Austrian economics. Not nobody, but the general consensus is that I didn't even know there was such a thing as Austrian economics a few years ago. I didn't even know it existed. It's
pretty wild. I don't know. There's different, theories on this, on why it is. And, some people, I think some people attribute it to, more like maliciousness on behalf of governments and some sort of like conspiracy type thing. I wouldn't go that far. I think it's just, the incentive system of the ones that are, since the Federal Reserve is essentially the most prestigious position, people are going to want to go to the Federal Reserve and they're going to want to agree with the philosophy of the people that they're trying to look up to. And then I think that the other thing is just given the success of the hard sciences in using data and empirical studies, that the social sciences basically wanted to use empirical evidence to kind of bolster their own credibility and say, we're real science too. And I think that urge to, seem legitimate compared to their hard sciences peers really pushed the boat in terms of getting them to go in the direction of, more statistical predictive forecasting models instead of like, here's first principles economic thinking and here's why these systems are too complex for anyone to actually model.
Yeah, I suppose that would be a logical argument. I have to say I go slightly more down the sort of conspiracy theory side. Yeah, well, not fully. What you've just said makes absolute sense. However, I think that maybe it started that way. They've realized that it's a load of bullshit, because you must eventually, like, if you keep doing something and making projections and forecasting and you're always wrong,
Right.
you must question it. They must know of Austrian economics, and they must know that Keynesian theory helps people in power, and the people in power do make the decisions. So they're going to make those decisions selfishly. So I don't know whether it's a conspiracy. It's just, the same with Bitcoin in terms of everything works in terms of you're not going to cheat the system because it doesn't work well for you. You'd be better playing by the rules, and it's all incentive based, and that's all really life is. It's just we sort of go about and do what's best for us generally, and I feel that's probably what's happened. Is they probably know, or at least some of them must know, and just think, oh well, life's pretty sweet for me. It's nice to be able to print money out of thin air, and it's crazy stuff that's going on. And yeah, so maybe I'm somewhere in the middle of the two, but you do. I mean, I certainly sound crazy when I say that to people. They're just like, "Oh, go away, you lunatic."
At the same time, you have. I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from in terms of, like, you had Alan Greenspan. He was chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was, probably the most respected central banker in a long time. He was considered a genius at the time, and he had written. He has this really, really good article called can you hear me?
Oh no, I've lost you again. Oh. Hi Connor, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Dude, I'm so sorry about all this.
That's all right. This is the problem with technology, isn't it?
I know, dude, I hate technology. We're going back to gold.
Peter Schiff was right all that time. That's it. We just weigh gold out and everyone has to meet in person. If you want to send a transaction to Australia, you get a boat.
Is there a way? I haven't used Zoom before. Is there something I need to do on my end?
I don't think so. I pressed record. It's showing us record. I've only used it once. Okay. I used it. I spoke to Pierre Richard the other day, and he suggested this one, so I used it to record with him. It looks like it's working. I can hear you. Does yours show us recording on your side?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Well, let's hope it's okay. But yeah, it's so much easier to meet over a beer and have the conversation. But we've got a big load of water in between us.
Yeah, well, okay, so I guess back to where we were. We were talking about whether or not there is a conspiracy to downplay Austrian economics abilities and to promote Keynesian thinking in schools. I think you have a good. Your point was good, which was that it just seems to be a coincidence that there's a theory that helps people in power and they just happen to use that one theory. And I think that something that is really interesting in this regard is Alan Greenspan wrote this short little essay titled Gold and Economic Freedom. And he basically was laying out a serious gold standard free banking piece. And, this is a guy who used to be chairman of the Federal Reserve, super revered amongst his peers. And, he was definitely down for the cause in terms of the way he was writing was really aggressive. And then he goes on to be the head of the Fed. And I find it really hard to believe that you go from understanding the sort of first principles Austrian understanding of money to thinking, oh, fiat money's fine. And then after he leaves the Federal Reserve, he goes back and, in 2016, he was talking about gold being money. And so, that really puzzled me in terms of maybe once you get in there, it's either you get in there and you're so arrogant that you think that everyone else somehow was not up to the task, but you, of all people, are. and that you are the person who can, just, wizard their way out of economic crises, or the problems that you face when you get in there are so big and the pressures are so overwhelming that you can't help but just fold and go along with it. So I don't know. I feel like that pressure is definitely mounting by the day. And I don't know, man. I feel like we're just kind of like at the end of the line. I mean, this new QE, not QE business, the whole repo market fiasco, it just feels like the clock's ticking, man.
It's so easy to feel like a lunatic when you say these things because no one's paying attention. Nobody is paying attention to this, it seems. Everyone's just going about their lives just like it's all normal, and they're talking about politics that doesn't matter and just useless shit. And you think, you just want to say, like, you want to just shake them and be like, do you have any idea where we are in this cycle? Like what is coming? Yeah. And it feels like it's inevitable. I can't see how it's not.
I know. It really does. And I just feel like we're just on an accelerating train, especially in the United States. I'm not too up to speed on British politics. I did pay attention to the latest election, and that was pretty interesting. It seems like, there was I guess I'm curious to hear your take on the latest election and sort of the fact that the Conservative Party seems to be doing quite well despite the, the metropolitan liberal elites, making fun of them at every turn.
Yeah. My take on it, and a lot of people will hate me for this, my take on it is I just don't care anymore. I've got to the point now where I don't trust or believe in any of them. The more time that I've spent involved in Bitcoin, the more I am going down the lines of just, I wouldn't say complete anarcho-capitalism, and I wouldn't say, but certainly a libertarian leaning, and that most of what is discussed by these politicians most of the time is not irrelevant, but fix the money first. And it frustrates me when people are talking about Brexit and all this sort of stuff. And it feels to me that there's no one that I would feel confident voting for.
Oh, totally.
I kind of just don't bother to spend my time on it. Yeah, one might be slightly better than the other for this reason, and one might be slightly better than the other for this reason. But what it's caused in the UK is that there's anger on both sides. There's, like you say, the sort of the woke people. Yeah. We have them here too, and it's just there's so much hate from that side that I almost feel like no one can sit and have a reasonable conversation anymore. And it feels to me like it all just stems really from money. For that reason, I've tried to step back and tried to just focus on what I can do myself rather than get too worried about it. But yeah, it's a crazy time, and people are really angry in this country. Like people are really sort of, I don't know, it's really polarized.
Yeah, and I think that, it's the same thing's happening in the U.S. It feels like it's accelerating. I wonder if it's just, it's easy to feel like tensions are high in the moment and they're actually not as bad as they seem. But it really feels like things are getting more heated over time. I think that you're definitely right in the fact that everyone seems to be like misdiagnosing the cause. I think it really comes down to just like stagnant economic progress from Keynesian policies. And that if the economy was humming along, I don't think there would be this sort of incredible outrage. But, that's just sort of where we're at right now, where these people don't really know where to channel their anger. And they, they kind of take the easy targets. Politicians aren't going to say, well, it's the printing press that both of us use.
Yeah.
Of course not. So it's like, some random social issue that affects the lives of hardly anyone, and that's like the big thing they rally the base around.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's scary here just because I think that it's going to be weird because basically I feel like the global economy is kind of in this weird hot potato moment where everyone's just kind of like especially from our sidelines, like we know something's going to happen. Like these, from first principles, these policies aren't sustainable. So it's a question of like who's left holding the bag. And, you know, I wonder if it's better to have Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders as president, because I do feel like whichever one is president, and I guess there's a similar relationship with the UK's politics, is like whichever group is in power when this whole thing goes down, whenever that is, you know, maybe it's next year, maybe it's this year from the coronavirus scare. I mean, you never know what black swan is going to bring it down, but we know that there's inherent fragility that is way bigger than we can deal with. And, and maybe it's 5 years from now, like 2 presidents from now or something like that. But whoever's there is going to take the blame because people love pointing at someone. And if it's Trump in office, people are going to blame capitalism, even though Trump is a, you know, socialist in many regards. On the other hand, if it's Bernie Sanders, it'll be blamed on socialism, which I think would be a good thing.
I agree.
So like maybe we want socialists to be in power now so they can go ahead and like take the blame when inevitably blows up. Because you know, if everything falls apart under, you know, quote unquote conservative capitalist types, then I just shudder at the thought of what sort of reactionary, you know, ultra socialist is going to suddenly be really popular when people want someone to be angry at.
It gives them the excuse, doesn't it? That's the problem. It's that misdiagnosis. What's weird is that, especially around this part of England, like I'm near London, most people that I meet are just nice, cool people who just want to spend time with their families. They aspire to, you know, eventually own their own home, and people have the general same sort of aspirations. They tend to generally not care too much what's happening as long as it's not affecting them and as long as people are being polite and reasonable, and most people just get on. But as soon as it comes to the politics, it's like, oh, well, you know, tax billionaires because, you know, if they weren't billionaires, then everything would be all right. And you're like, no, you're wrong. And here's a list of reasons why that's absolutely stupid what you're saying. And then you have the other people on the other side who are saying, oh, well, you know, life's getting harder and we're getting more and more, business is getting harder because we're getting more regulations and there's not as much money because there's immigrants coming in and there's this and there's that. And you're like, no, you're wrong as well. You're both wrong. It's actually just mainly the money. That's where the problem is. So, I just don't know what the answer is unless Bitcoin can run for president.
I mean, I think that it is interesting, and I think Brexit is sort of the beginning stages of this. And who knows, maybe Brexit is just like phase 1 of further breakup. But like, I think in the United States, there's suddenly sort of renewed talks for. I just hear the idea more commonly of, you know, it wouldn't be so bad if California just left, or it wouldn't be so bad if Texas just left. And like, I think the idea of, you know, maybe putting 500 million people under one government can't quite meet the needs of everyone in their own locality. I think that idea is kind of coming back, and I hope it does, because, you know, as someone who values decentralization and, you know, humility and decision making, I think that the best answers come at a local scale, and that the larger the scale, the larger the possibility for corruption and just like, you know, failure to understand what you're governing. And so maybe Bitcoin kind of creates, or I don't know, I feel like we're kind of on this path either way of sort of like a fracturing. And, you know, maybe Bitcoin is a good way to sort of create a monetary system outside of these sort of mega nation states. Because, I mean, ultimately nationalism is something that has been around for, you know, the past like 200, 300 years. I mean, it's like a relatively new invention. But practically speaking, it doesn't really make any sense. Like,
no,
the people on the East Coast hate the West Coast and vice versa. So why are it already, there's a lot of tension, but imagine when there's all these pensions where, you know, California has been underfunding its pension, has been, you know, taking risky bets in terms of how it's managing its finances. And then you have like a, you know, a more fiscally conservative state like North Carolina, which, you know, has done a decent job at balancing its budget. Its pensions are like relatively well funded. And suddenly it's going to be, not only do you hate these people and you have to be governed under the same laws as them, but, oh, you also have to bail them out. And I feel like that will be kind of the tipping point for this sort of increased fracturing of, you know, like, you know, we've been shouldering the burden. We've been the savers. Why are we stuck with a bill for other people who haven't been doing that? I don't know if there's similar problems in the UK, but
very much so.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the vibe here, and I think that it's only going one direction because those pensions, especially, I mean, it all comes back to money, right? All these pensions are underfunded because they're based on estimates from, you know, statisticians who are projecting that they'd be able to get a rate of return of like 7%, and you know, now you have negative interest rates. It's basically bankrupting pensions and, you know, just the banking system generally.
It's hitting Europe quite badly.
Yeah. That it just, you know, it just increases the temperature bit by bit by bit. And I feel like eventually people are just going to. That's a
nice little plug for the show there. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And as the monetary policy continues to turn up the heat, I think that even if people don't realize it's going to be money, and I don't think many people are going to realize that money is the problem.
No, they won't.
Until we get to a real crisis. That even in the medium term, when they still don't realize, I think it'll still be sort of a shift to smaller scale governance. So,
yeah, like you say, it makes sense to have things on a local level, because how can you understand something when you're the other side of the country? How can you understand the way things work? You can't just look at numbers on a screen and think you can understand those human interactions and how things work. It just doesn't make sense.
And you just have so much more accountability when you're focusing on a smaller scale group of people and someone that's more directly accountable to, all right, if they're, you know, if the person in DC is screwing over someone at the federal level, like, they don't know these people, they're never going to interact with them. It's easy when you're screwing over 500 million people to treat them as, like, you know, these faceless numbers on a page. Whereas if your accountability comes at a local level, it's really hard to justify being corrupt. And
you got to see their faces every day. Yeah,
you got to drive by the elementary school that you just chose to embezzle. And I think that's just, you know, it's a much better system, and it also allows competition among not nation states, but, well, kind of. Essentially, like, if this fracturing happens, then you can have a lot more competition where people can be like, you know, I'm not going to be in the state that can't balance its budget, that can't, you know, provide infrastructure at a reasonable cost. And, you know, you start to see these sort of competitive taxing programs. I think that is where we really start to see some major improvements in governance, because right now, with things so large, there's, you know, like, it doesn't really matter where you go in the United States, you're going to be subject to pretty much the same system. And to leave, you know, you have to, like, go all the way across the ocean, which isn't very practical. So, you know, more competition at a smaller scale from fracturing seems like it'd be very good for everyone in terms of
quality. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like you say, you have the accountability because it's on your doorstep, and if you don't like it and another state or another country is doing things better in your eyes, then you vote with your feet and your money.
Yeah.
It does seem to make sense. And, you know, a lot of people, especially on our Bitcoin Twitter, you know, you've got the Citadel meme and you've got all this sort of stuff going on, and, like, obviously a lot of it's tongue in cheek, but I don't necessarily see that it's going to be that far from the truth in terms of, you know, if there's going to be certain places which are better for starting a business or better for tax reasons for people's Bitcoin and all this sort of stuff, I do see people getting pulled into these areas where it meets their needs and fits with their principles. And like you say, there's going to be a fracturing of ideas. And the way I see that eventually playing out is that as these ideas fracture and these people move, the people who have these socialist tendencies, no matter what happens over time, they're going to have to somehow fund themselves, which they're not used to. And then suddenly they're, I think, going to change their minds.
Yeah, no, because, totally. You know, because they're going to be broke.
Yeah, they're going to be broke. They're going to go, oh, fucking hell, what am I doing? Like, where's the money? It's like, yeah, well, we told you.
Yeah.
This is what we've said. So, in many ways, it's that, and it's self-regulating then, isn't it? Because, if you're going to have those socialist tendencies and be unrealistic, eventually you're going to get hungry. And then when you get hungry, then maybe you're going to have a bit more of a capitalist mindset, and then maybe you change. And if you don't change, you'll starve. That's nature.
Yeah, and I just feel like at this point in the cycle, I don't know, it is really strange because I feel like I cannot understand why the idea of socialism won't die, because it just seems like such a obviously bad idea that it's just been disproven and disproven and disproven, and yet somehow it's I don't know, I find socialism to be really similar to like ideas that that the earth is the center of the universe, because like when you look, I mean yeah, exactly. When you like, from the average everyday person's perspective, you look up and you're like, oh yeah, there goes the sun, it just rotated around us again. And like the ideas of socialism of like, we'll take some of this money and we'll take it from those rich people and we'll give it to all these poor people and we just solve society. Like, it just seems so simple, and yet you just have to drill it into people's heads that, like, fundamentally that's not how wealth works. Wealth is not a zero-sum game. And you want to promote the policies that promote the most mutually beneficial wealth creation, which is a concept that is not really intuitive. The intuitive concept is, everyone has a slice of the pie, and pie is a fixed size. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of people in the United States that they're just going to have to go through a socialist phase and see how bad it can get. Like San Francisco, despite just going straight into the ground these past 5 years, just still is hellbent on making things worse. It blows my mind. It's like they can't learn, but
like,
I don't know.
So for example, like let's have a positive view on the future and say that, and I believe this, and it sounds like you believe this, that eventually Bitcoin becomes maybe the global reserve currency, and technologies like Lightning and these contracts and things can really help businesses and people interact globally. Where do you see things going? Like if you were to take a sort of, call it 15, 20 years from now, where do you see this going? And do you see it being, it's a bit of a loaded question actually. Let me rephrase it. Do you think that having Bitcoin as a base money is going to make for a better world and make it fairer in society for people who want to work?
I think there's kind of two elements of that, because it depends on your definition of fair. And I think The Sovereign Individual is still just the best book by far in terms of just predicting what's going to happen. I think that their analysis of kind of how this technology sort of percolates and changes society makes the most amount of sense. I think that Bitcoin dramatically improves human freedom, and I think that is a incredible good. And so in terms of making society more fair, it's unquestionable that the ability to freely communicate value with anyone around the globe is massive and makes the world a lot more fair for people, just like the internet has.
Yes.
But I also think that if you define, there's also this idea of fairness that is like, there's this concept of like, I would rather make $70,000 a year and all my neighbors make $60,000 than make, $80,000 a year and all my neighbors make $100,000. And there's this idea of like, you can be wealthier, but if inequality is greater or not in your favor, then you're not going to feel like it's fair. And I do feel like Bitcoin will increase inequality around the world in some ways. I feel like the internet, and Nassim Taleb kind of talks about this in The Black Swan, but essentially like we've moved from Mediocristan to Extremistan. We've moved from small independent systems that have their own, ecosystem that is more diverse into these more like mimetic viral systems that are fractally distributed and that you have in those situations you have a lot more concentration of outcomes and just like a few fat tails. And I think that I think he's pretty right on that. And I think we've already seen that with the internet, where like, you know, you've kind of flattened out a lot of different economies. And like, so instead of having a unique music market in each different country, now you kind of have like a global pop music industry, and there's like there's a few like mega superstars. And I think that's, you know, kind of the trend over the past 200 years as we've just become more globalized, and that's just the nature of markets. So I think that Bitcoin dramatically improves human freedom, fairness, and access to these markets. But I think that some people might think, oh my God, the extremes are even more extreme. It's clearly unfair. And I don't think that's a valid criticism, but I think that it can be invalid and still acted upon, and that some people will freak out and be essentially reactionary to that. And, you know, I don't think it'll be, I don't know. I go back and forth. Some days I'm super optimistic. Other days I feel like it's going to take some real pain and frustration. Well, I think that there's going to be pain and frustration either way, because right now we're living in a world where a lot of promises just can't be met. The question is, do we move from that system to a new, you know, more fractured local Bitcoin system in a peaceful way? We'll see. The jury's still out on that one.
We will. No, I think I agree with what you're saying there. I think when I say fairer, what I really mean is that there's less of a barrier to entry with Bitcoin. I feel that in more parts of the world, more people can be part of the economy.
Yeah.
And if there's less regulation and less big government, I feel that the way that they can have monopolies will change, because people can start up a business online from a laptop and accept Bitcoin. They haven't had to go and see a regulator and a solicitor and an accountant and all of these barriers that for somebody who's really not got any money behind them, it is unthinkable in today's society. And for me, that's a really exciting thing, because I think, why shouldn't they be allowed to give it a go? And why shouldn't they be allowed to, you know, try and all these big businesses just cry out for regulation, and it just crushes innovation.
Oh, totally. Because, I mean, I think that's another thing is like people misunderstand that regulation is something that helps business instead of like reins it in, you know, because regulation is essentially just a tool to like box off your own territory to make sure you can't have competitors. But
absolutely,
I think, I mean, that is, I mean, that's why I care about this so much, and I'm totally on the same page of, you know, that is truly going to change the world when anyone can have a business. And I think that my concern, and you know, this is just an inevitable outcome, is places like the United States were essentially built on this idea that the United States is like, you know, worth more or something like that, you know, because the best companies were in the United States and the best ideas were in the United States, and we kind of had this network effect. And as a result, a lot of standard Americans who didn't really have any great skills, but they still got paid a lot, of like, you know, many times more than their counterparts that were doing unskilled labor in other parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
And essentially, just given the dynamics of America was where the ideas were, it was where the money was in the post-war era, and that was how businesses were set up. So the businesses were centralized, that the people made the most money for unskilled labor in the United States. And there was a very high standard of living for the average unskilled worker in the United States compared to unskilled workers in other parts of the world. And as we kind of move into this digital environment, and anyone can make a company anywhere and can accept Bitcoin anywhere, then you have much more distributed companies. And I think, you know, essentially the United States had a monopoly, and they were sort of like benefiting from their status. But as this competition kind of seeps in, the countries that were making a lot relative to their peers for the same type of work are suddenly going to see that bonus drop off. And I think that's going to be painful. Definitely.
Oh, for sure. Here too.
And, that's like
exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. And we're already seeing the beginning of it. And I think it's a big reason for a rise of populism in the West. And, that's kind of like the cost of progress. It's always good when a free market flourishes, I think, and that when someone who previously had a monopoly finally has some competition, but, the monopolist is going to lose out and it's not going to be quite as good for them. And I don't know. I think so Jeff Vandrew recently did a podcast with Marty Bent where he talked about this, and he takes a contrary. He's a Bitcoiner, but he's also sort of. He wouldn't say he's a socialist, but I would say he's a socialist.
This is the guy who was talking about Marxism and all of these sort of things, wasn't it? Yeah. I have to say I agreed with very little of what he said.
I did too, and I think that, but I think his viewpoint is, I think I disagree with him, but I understand where he's coming from, and I think that is going to be an incredibly common perspective going forward.
Oh,
it's just sort of like. We need, I guess his point is like, we need to just maintain the standards that we used to have. And I think the response is, first of all, there's like, I think the biggest response is simply you can't, right? Like the standards we used to have were based on that monopoly position for unskilled labor. And as all these other countries are coming in and competing, then you just can't maintain those living standards. And if you try to impose those living standards through coercion and through a government, then you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot even faster, because now you're definitely not going to, like, if you're increasing your minimum wage laws to try to claw back some semblance of prosperity you used to have, then it's just going to make you even less competitive, and it's going to make you fall even faster on the global stage. So I think there's really no turning back at this point. Kind of the genie's out of the bottle, and I'm excited for what it brings. But I do think it is about perspective, and there's going to be cost to some communities that have kind of thrived on third world countries not really having a seat at the table.
Yeah, it feels like it's just going to be massive change, and that it's going to be quite quick. And it also, like you said earlier, we don't know how long things can continue like they are, and that we have this fiat consumerist sort of crazy and negative interest rates and all this crazy stuff that's happening.
Yeah,
we don't know what's going to cause it to implode or explode, or but it feels like it's really close, and probably there'll be a lot of pain before there's good that comes out, almost like it's that forest that needs to burn down, and new saplings will grow, but there's going to be some despair out there, and I don't know how to. That's part of the reason I started this podcast, was like, I've given up talking to normal people about this stuff. I've just given up. It is just, they look at you like you're a lunatic. Everyone has their strong opinions, but when you really dig into why they hold those opinions, it pretty much comes down to, well, I read it in the newspaper, and you're like, right, well, do you want to just open your mind to something slightly different? And then, but they don't. So the idea with this was to just try and sort of get different people's opinions and experts in different fields to try and open people's eyes, because I don't want to see the people around me suffer, but every day I just think, how much longer have we got? Like,
I know, man.
What's going to happen?
I know, it's hard. I mean, I come from like just a small town in North Carolina, and it's not a town with any money really, and it's weird going back there. I visit occasionally on breaks and stuff, and it does. I mean, I don't know. It's weird because it kind of goes back to the dynamics of this new environment or like economic system we're in, where people are much more mobile, and I think it's partially due to the rise of the internet. But like 50 years ago, when people were really successful, they would stick around. They would become the attorney in town, or they would become the doctor in town.
Yeah.
But now it feels like the opportunities are, just kind of dwindling. And
Like a
so
brain
there's
drain.
so the brain drain is happening not only from, you hear about brain drain happening a lot from like, countries in the Middle East or something where their best scientists come to the United States to study in universities or something. But there's another type of brain drain, which is essentially the very brightest kids in the United States. And I wonder if this happens in Britain too, but essentially the very brightest kids, they go work in, DC or New York City or San Francisco or LA, and they don't come back. They're trying to go on that professional path, and all the major companies and major opportunities in consulting or law, finance, they're in these big metropolitan centers. And then the people who stay behind are not as qualified, or, the people who just didn't make it out for whatever reason. Maybe they're qualified, but, they just have a grandparent they need to take care of, or a parent they need to take care of, and they just practically can't leave. And so there's sort of this like major disproportionate set of opportunities in these coastal areas, coastal cities, metropolitan areas, and the smaller towns and stuff are just being sucked dry of talent. And that's another thing that when I go back, I wonder how that's going to play out and how that kind of evolves. Because I think that's another reason that kind of like heightens tensions is like you don't have, I don't know, there's just a lot more mobility. So it makes communities a lot more fragile, it seems like, for the people that are left behind. It's a weird phenomenon.
It's similar here, but I find as well that a lot of it comes down to like there's a lot of crazy smart people, and they then never make it to university because of, like saying, it's either they have someone to care for, or financial situation means they can't do it, or there's lots of different reasons, and you have this sort of elitist society, which maybe is more prevalent in the UK than it is in America. I don't know, but we have some absolute fuckwits who have a mummy and daddy. I mean, I went to a private school. Like, I was around a lot of very, very wealthy kids, and some of these kids just have a mummy and daddy who maybe work in the banking sector, and they get a job, and somehow they keep it. I don't know how. And then there's these other kids who are miles more competent, and they never get the chance. It's a really weird system.
Well, going back to what Jeff Vandrew was talking about, and his points on, he was talking from like a distributivist perspective, and he was, trying to thread the needle between like anarcho-capitalism and socialism. And I think that a big issue with his point was the presumption that capital always centralizes. And that was kind of like a really key assumption to him. And I want to kind of go back to the idea that it always comes back down to the money, because I do feel like a lot of this sort of weird brain drain that's happening, where talented kids are going to the only opportunities they have, which is on the coastal cities, is because we have artificially large companies, essentially, because the size of firms is dictated by the type of money there is. And I think that there's a really strong case to be made that if we didn't have a fiat monetary system, and we didn't have the ability to have massive deficits, subsidies, regulations, and essentially create artificially large firms by eliminating their competition, that the most efficient economic organization would not be to build something the size of Amazon and ship something across the country. It would be to build it right there nearby. And the local companies are actually more efficient, but these other types of companies like Amazon can survive by, a subsidized infrastructure system and various types of regulations on how companies have to behave and perform. And, you need a certain scale to be able to fit the rules and to lobby your way for, tax breaks or whatever it is. And that small scale stuff just can't do that under a fiat monetary system. And I think that under a Bitcoin standard, it would pressure firms to be much smaller, because you're just not going to get the same level of handouts. And so, that sort of fractal localism would be really good in terms of it would be benefited by a hard money system that sort of keeps it all in line.
Yeah, and I've heard you made a point recently, which I thought was interesting as well. I can't remember where you might have been on with Marty actually when you were talking about this, but talking about money being held in assets like property and the stock market and these big zombie businesses and all this sort of stuff, how potentially if you have something like Bitcoin, the changes that can make. I mean, we have it here. Property prices are obscene. And a lot of it is just because it's like, well, where do you park your money? You've got this fiat system, that there's inflation, that these assets are going to continue to bubble because the money's got to go somewhere. And what it does is it prices a lot of people out of that market. And a lot of the anger that we feel or we hear here is that like, young people can't buy properties and all the rest of it. And, let's tax landlords. It's like, well, actually, no, look at the money again. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on if Bitcoin is this black hole and it does suck up more and more of this value, what will happen in terms of these traditional assets that people will park their money in? How is that going to change things?
Yeah, I think that's another huge important thing is like we've never had a pure money, or at least, since World War I, essentially, we haven't had like this sort of pure store of value that we can like park things in or park our time in. And so we've been having to use alternatives, and that does lead to things not being used for their commodity uses, but we're using them for their monetary properties. And I think that it goes missed a lot because people just think, these people are just getting wealthy and they're making it so I can't afford to live here. And then they're like, the solution is government control of housing, or the solution is to, artificially, cap rent, or, all these sort of market interventions that just lead to further problems with housing and sort of exacerbate the issues. Rent control has never worked, but somehow it still seems like a good idea because, it goes back to like the thinking the sun revolves around the earth. It's like, well, prices are too high. I don't know why that is, but maybe we should just stop making them high. It's like, okay, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We need to think about why all this money is flooding into these assets people aren't using in the first place. And, it really comes back down to the piggy bank problem of people don't know where to park their wealth. And you can imagine with negative interest rates, this is only going to get much, much crazier because now they can't even put their money in a bank.
Yeah. Oh, we're basically there now. We're at like 25 bips or something here.
So, in terms of like thinking about, it's nuts, and it's only going to continue to get worse. But then in terms of Bitcoin, like think of the incredible upside potential. Like Bitcoin's not only competing with other countries' monetary bases, like the total addressable market of Bitcoin is like literally global store value in all of these different aspects. Like how much money is funneled into real estate or the stock market simply to store value, and people don't want to be exposed to risk. Like essentially the solution to risk right now is just diversify and just, park your money in passive index funds. But even that I think is much, much more risky than people believe. And it's just a temporary solution. And I think when ultimately all of this comes to light and this sort of fragile economic system finally has its day, whenever that is, that, it's all going to be clear that we just need something safe that doesn't require you to make incredibly risky financial bets on, and you can just park it somewhere, you can move it anywhere, and you can, liquidate it whenever you want. That's crazy. I mean, the real estate market is trillions. The stock market that is being used for monetary purposes instead of, actual, financial, instead of like, you'd think that you buy a stock when you have reason to believe that the price is going to go up because you evaluate the fundamentals. Very little stock buying is based on that, investment strategy. It's just based on trying to park your money somewhere. So
Yeah,
It's
and
crazy
like
to
you say,
imagine how big Bitcoin can get as this sort of global value exchange system.
well, like you said, a total addressable market. You know, people scoff when you say we're gunning for gold. People scoff at that,
Yeah.
but really, what we're saying is, well, gold's the start, and the total addressable market is so much bigger because of like what you've said, and it's not just property. It's it's like, and not just property in the stock market. You've got things like art. I'm an
Yeah.
artist. I appreciate art. But when people are spending hundreds of millions of pounds on a painting, it's not actually because they love that painting so much. When they walk down in the morning, they look at that painting, it lights up their world in the same way that 100 million pounds would. It's because they need to park their wealth somewhere.
Yeah.
And if, like you say, if we do have it change across and it does suck up that value, and people can be confident and secure in the fact that, okay, my money's secure in Bitcoin, there's that, if anything, it's going to be increasing in value over time, although less and less over time because,
Right.
it's become less volatile. However, they can have this thoughtful calculation of like, okay, well, what am I going to do with my money? And I feel that is one of the things that leads to a better world. It leads to better decision making and a sort of a more thoughtful and long-term view on things rather than just shit, but I put money. And the people with the money get richer and the people without it get poorer. And it seems like an obvious that's where the problem is.
Totally. And that's why we're here. I'm curious, for an artist perspective, you're the first like Bitcoin artist I've really talked to.
Oh, really?
I'm curious. So Saifedean in the Bitcoin Standard,
he slates art.
Incredible monetary history, and there's a few parts of there where he's like, by the way, modern art, it's crap. It's all because of money. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like do you feel like money has had, or I guess the use of money as a store of value, is that relevant when thinking about these types of things? What are your thoughts?
To some extent, I would say that I agree with almost everything that Saif says in that book. I think it's an amazing book. I don't necessarily agree. Well, I don't agree that all modern art is crap, and that the only the only thing that's worth painting is something that looks exactly like the thing that you're painting.
Right.
I think that it's subjective.
Totally. Subjective value theory.
Yeah, and what I like is going to be different to what someone else likes, and I think that for me anyway, I came from more of a business background and became an artist because I was suffering from depression and anxiety, and I was painting in the evenings after work to get over those anxieties and problems, and it became just a passion where I just love painting. So the value for me is really, it can't be measured. I would say, like, it's difficult to measure that. And if someone enjoys my work and they want to buy it, that's amazing. I'm not an artist at the level where anyone's investing in my art. They're just like, okay, I like that piece, it will look good on my wall. But I do think he has a point in terms of some of the artwork, and it's subjective. Like, to me, it's bullshit. I look at some of the work and I think, I'm sorry, but I don't think that's worth $30 million. And there are artists who are doing much, much more interesting work in my eyes. But I think that a lot of it comes down to snobbery. And there's probably a little inside club where it's like, you have art critiques who are friends with the top artists, who know the top galleries, who know the top investors. And if they say it's brilliant and it's going to hold value. So I agree with him in that sense.
It's really interesting. I just have zero exposure to that world, but when coming across it, there has been definitely modern art that I feel like has been really moving to me. And I don't think that art's dead or anything like that.
No.
But it is weird going through some museums and you're just like, all right, how is that on the wall?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I also think it's just like there's been a weird multiplication of artwork also. digital paintings and things like that have just like blown open what's even considered like, or who, it goes back to the access question, right? Like, because so many more people have access to art and digital tools for drawing and then recreation and reproduction of those images everywhere. You know, it's the art critic really just becomes a curator, and it seems like curators at present, art critics are not keeping up with curation properly, and that there's much more art out there, especially on the internet, that is just completely flying under the radar, and they're still kind of stuck in like an old system. And to say that art is failing as a whole, I feel like isn't taking into account progress that's being made digitally, or like, you know, many other places.
Yeah, it's like saying music's dead. You know, you flick on the radio, there's a lot of shit on the radio, and you think, what is this? Like, what is this? But they're making money, and then you can walk down the street and there's a busker and they blow your mind. And it's the same in the art world. I see people who can barely afford to pay the bills, and they are talented beyond belief. I look at their work and I just think, oh, if I could have 1% of your talent, I would just, I would be so happy. But you can't pay the bills, and I see other work where I think I hate it. I'd actually hate to have that on my wall, but it's millions of dollars. So I think it's the same with any type of art, whether it's music or painting or or theatre or film or any of these things. It is very difficult to come up with a value, and I think it is controlled by a small group of people.
Totally.
So, listen, I don't want to take too much of your time, Connor, but I would like to just ask you another question. I wondered if there's one thing that excites you the most at the moment, and maybe you'll be writing about it soon. If there's one thing that, looking out over the course of this year, what excites you the most and what worries you the most? What are the two things that most exciting and most worrying in your eyes from what you've seen in this space?
That's a great question. I think, one thing that excites me, there's kind of two big ones that stick out for me. One I've already talked about, which is multi-part payments. I mean, I just think that is going to be so massive for Lightning user experience, and it's just going to put so many criticism. I mean, people have been criticizing Lightning for like not working properly for a long time, despite it being
vaporware
because of user experience. But this is just going to like just destroy that argument completely. The other thing that I'm really excited about is the halvening. I mean, I think people really underestimate it, man. It's I think it's going to get wild. Maybe not like the day of, but just, it's going to be a long year. There's 8 months after the halvening, and we'll see what happens. I think, price going up is one of the most important things for Bitcoin, just because.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's the ultimate advertisement and publicity. So that's always exciting.
If Plan B is right, and this cointegration and all this kind of stuff is correct, then this halvening is going to be. Is it halvening or halving, or a source suggested halfening? I liked that one. Did you see that one?
Yeah, I like that one.
I like that. The halfening.
Things I'm worried about. I don't have any major concerns other than just like this weird, like the sky's about to fall at any moment and I don't know when it's going to be. Or maybe the coronavirus. That's been pretty freaky lately too. It's funny. Bitcoin Twitter is in this like perfect balance between, they don't believe anything on the mainstream media, right? So it's either the coronavirus is completely made up to just scare you into complacency and you shouldn't even consider it in your daily life. And then the other half of Bitcoin Twitter is like, oh my God, guys, the media is completely lying to you. It's so much worse than you think it is.
Get your masks. Get your masks.
They're like giving you prepping advice. And I'm like, which one's true? They both seem compelling. So, I don't know. Hopefully we'll live through the halvening.
I hope so. I'm sure there'll be some big parties if we're right and things go the way we think they're going to be.
Totally, man.
All right. Well, listen, like I say, I don't want to take too much of your time, but it's been really, really nice to have a chat with you. I've followed you for a while. You put out some amazing content. Grasp on the whole space is just mind blowing. And I would suggest to any of my listeners, if you want to learn more about the things that we've talked about today, follow Connor. You're going to be in for a treat. So if you can just tell them where to find you and what you're working on. And
Yeah, the best place to find me is on my Twitter account. It's _Connor Brown _, and that's Connor with an ER at the end. And that's where I post all my stuff. And you can also find me at Medium at my Medium username is @Connor _. So those are 2 places to find me, and I should have some more articles coming out in the next few months. I'm just kind of here researching right now and cranking out stuff. So yeah, we'll see what comes down the pipe. But man, I've had a blast with this conversation, and I really appreciate you having me on and talking to me.
Excellent. No, it's been really, really good. And if you do find yourself in London anytime, just give me a shout. Let's go for a drink. And
yes, it
yeah,
has to happen.
It'd be really nice to meet. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
For sure. All right. Thanks again. And yeah, we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
All right.
Take care. Cheers, Connor.
All right. See you, man.